the phone rang just after midnight, cutting through the kind of silence that only exists before something breaks. My heart was still somewhere between sleep and panic when I heard her name. Lily. And everything inside me froze. The air felt too thin, the house too big, and the world too cruel to be real. If you've ever gotten a call that changed everything, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Because sometimes the stories we never want to tell are the ones others need to hear. The smell of rain drifted through the cracked window as I grabbed my keys, my hands shaking, my mind already racing through 1,000 impossible thoughts. That was the night my world split open, and I realized what it truly means to protect the people you love. It was just past 2:30 a.m. when the phone ripped through the quiet. My heart jumped before my mind could even wake. For a second, I thought it was a wrong number, a mistake. But the voice on the other end cut through me. Lily. My Lily. Her words came out in gasps, tangled with sobs. She said she was at the station, that something terrible had happened. For a moment, everything froze. The silence after the call was deafening. I could still hear her voice shaking, the kind of sound that sticks to your bones. My hands trembled as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring into the dark. I wanted to believe I'd misheard, that it couldn't be true. But I knew that tone, that breathless panic, the same one I once had when the world turned on me too. Then instinct took over. I didn't need to understand everything. I just needed to move. I threw on my coat, fumbled for the car keys, and felt my pulse steady as I walked out into the night. The cold air hit me hard, clearing the fog from my head. She said she defended herself. From him. Those words echoed in my chest as I backed out of the driveway. The road ahead was empty, but my mind raced faster than the engine. No one was going to take her story and twist it, not while I was still breathing. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and whispered to myself, "Steady and sure, I'm coming. Lily." And I drove toward the station. The house was silent again, but my thoughts were loud. I sat in the driver's seat, hands frozen on the steering wheel, watching the streetlights blur through the windshield. The phone call still replayed in my head. Lily's voice cracking, the sound of fear and disbelief wrapped together. I forced myself to breathe, to think. I had to be steady for her. Lily has always been the gentle one, the kind of girl who apologized even when she wasn't at fault. When she was little, she used to braid my hair while telling stories about the stars. She believed people were mostly good. I wish I still believed that. Somewhere between her laughter and her mother's silence, I stopped recognizing the warmth that used to fill our home. Claire, my daughter, had changed after marrying Tom. At first, he seemed charming, reliable, the sort of man who held doors open and remembered birthdays. But beneath that calm voice was control disguised as care. I saw it in the way Claire's eyes dimmed over the years, how Lily's confidence wilted under constant correction. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. I wanted peace. I convinced myself that love would fix what anger had broken. But peace, built on silence, is just fear in disguise. I know that now. I remember the day Lily came to me, a small bruise on her arm, saying she fell. I knew she was lying, and I knew why. I told her to be strong, But I didn't tell her what strength really means. Maybe that's why she's in a cell tonight, because she finally found the strength I once buried. The engine hummed softly beneath me. The air was thick with guilt and resolve. I looked toward the horizon, where the city lights met the night, and whispered a promise to myself. This time, I won't stay silent, not as a lawyer, not as a bystander, as her grandmother. I shifted into drive and pulled away from the curb, heading toward the station, toward the truth that waited there. The night stretched endlessly ahead of me as I drove. The road was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel sharper. The hum of the tires, the rhythm of my heartbeat, the faint rattle of my wedding ring against the steering wheel. Streetlights slid across the windshield in broken patterns, like flashes of old memories I didn't want but couldn't escape. I had driven this road 100 times before, but never like this. Not with my granddaughter behind bars and my daughter somewhere drowning in her own silence. The air felt heavy, thick with regret. Every turn of the wheel reminded me how long I'd been steering away from the truth. Tom came into our lives like a shadow with a smile. He didn't take control all at once. It was slow, careful. He started with little things, choosing the restaurant, picking Lily up from school, insisting Claire quit her job because family should come first. At first, I told myself he was just protective, but protection and possession often wear the same face. I saw how he'd correct Claire's tone, how Lily's laughter got smaller each year. And still, I said nothing. I told myself not to interfere. I used to be a prosecutor. I knew how patterns of control began. I'd seen it in courtrooms, in police reports, in women's eyes when they testified. But it's one thing to see it in others. It's another to admit it's in your own family. My instincts had whispered warnings I didn't want to hear. I silenced them, because silence felt safer than confrontation. Now, as the road curved toward downtown, I realized that silence was the most dangerous choice of all. Every mile I drove was a confession. Every thought of Lily was a reminder of what courage looks like when fear has nowhere left to hide. The rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, each drop like penance against the windshield. Through the blur of lights ahead, I caught sight of red and blue flashing in the distance. The police station. My hands tightened on the wheel. The old prosecutor in me stirred. But this wasn't about law anymore. It was about love. It was about finally standing up when it mattered most. As I pulled into the parking lot, I cut the engine and sat in silence for one last breath. Then I whispered to myself, steady and low, no more fear. And I stepped out into the rain. The station looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the hour. Maybe it was the way the fluorescent lights hummed against the silence. The air smelled like stale coffee and cold paperwork. The kind of place where stories like Lily's got turned into statistics. I had walked into stations like this hundreds of times before, but never as a grandmother. Never with this kind of fear sitting in my chest. At the front desk, the young officer barely looked up when I said Lily's name. His voice was flat, rehearsed, like he'd already decided what kind of girl she was. I caught his eyes for just a moment, that detached professionalism I used to wear like armor. I hated seeing it now. Then I saw her, my Lily, sitting on a metal chair in the corner, hands cuffed, eyes red. She looked smaller than I remembered. Fragile in that way only someone who's just survived something awful can be. My heart broke and burned at the same time. She wasn't dangerous. She was terrified, and the people here couldn't see the difference. I forced myself to stay composed. Years in court taught me that emotion makes them dismiss you. So I took a breath, squared my shoulders, and said who I was: retired district attorney, Margaret Walker. That changed everything. Suddenly, the officer stood straighter. His voice softened, and the others began to move with a kind of awkward respect. The hypocrisy of it all made my stomach twist. My granddaughter's fear hadn't moved them, but my title had. I remembered the victims who sat across from me years ago. Women who weren't believed, who were told to calm down while their abusers walked free. And now, here was Lily, another young woman paying for surviving. As they led me to the holding room, I felt the shift inside me. The grief didn't disappear, but it hardened into resolve. I wasn't here to plead. I was here to fight. The system I once served had failed too many times, and I wouldn't let it fail her. I stopped outside the door, steadying my breath. I could hear her crying softly on the other side. The law had its rules, but tonight, I had my own. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Lily looked so small when they brought her out. The relief of seeing her walk free was tangled with heartbreak. Her face pale, her eyes swollen, her shoulders trembling like someone who'd been carrying too much for too long. When I wrapped my arms around her, she didn't cry. She just exhaled, as if her body had finally run out of ways to hold the pain. We sat in silence for a while, in that gray room that smelled of bleach and exhaustion. I could still feel the officers watching from behind the glass. It was the same old pattern. They saw a teenage girl who fought back, not the man who made her fight for her safety. I'd spent decades watching that blindness play out in courtrooms. I never imagined I'd see it from this side of the glass. Piece by piece, the truth came together. It wasn't just one night. It had been years. The slow tightening of control. Tom had isolated them under the pretense of family. He'd cut off Lily's friends, convinced Claire to stop visiting me, and turned every disagreement into proof that they were ungrateful. That's how it always starts. Small lies, careful blame. By the time the bruises appear, the victim already believes they deserve them. I remembered the fear I'd once seen in Lily's eyes when she brushed off a question about her arm. I remembered the way Claire flinched when Tom raised his voice at a Thanksgiving dinner. I saw all of it clearly now, the moments I'd chosen not to see before. As Lily spoke, her words came out broken, quiet. She said she didn't mean to hurt him, that he had cornered her again, called her names, grabbed her by the wrist, and wouldn't let go. She tried to protect herself. I felt that sentence like a knife. Protect herself. The same phrase I'd heard from so many women who never got justice. When the officers handed me the initial report, I scanned it with an old, familiar eye. The inconsistencies leapt out, phrasing that favored Tom, omissions that made Lily look unstable. He'd already spun his story, using his status, his calm voice, his connections. The same tactics men like him always used: control through charm, manipulation disguised as truth. That's when the prosecutor in me came back, sharper than ever. I wasn't going to wait for the system to sort this out. I'd gather evidence, witnesses, every scrap of the truth they ignored. This time, I wouldn't stay silent or civilized. By the time we walked out of the station, the sky was beginning to lighten. I stood by the car, watching the first edge of dawn break across the horizon. The light hit the wet pavement, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something close to clarity. The truth was out now, ugly, painful, undeniable, and I knew exactly what had to come next. By the time I got home, the first light of morning had already crept across the kitchen floor. The house was still, the kind of stillness that comes after a storm. I dropped my coat over the chair and stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock. For the first time in hours, I could think clearly. This wasn't just about Lily anymore. It was about every woman I'd ever seen silenced by the system. Every file I'd once closed because there wasn't enough evidence. Every face that walked out of my courtroom carrying shame they didn't deserve. I'd built a career believing the law could protect the innocent, but tonight reminded me, justice doesn't always live in the paperwork. Sometimes you have to drag it into the light yourself. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and spread out the police report. The pages were wrinkled from the rain, the ink smudged, but I could still see the omissions, gaps that told me where truth had been stripped away. I started taking notes, dates, names, inconsistencies. It felt familiar, methodical, like muscle memory. The prosecutor in me wasn't gone. She had just been asleep. Next, I pulled out my old contacts list. I hadn't called most of these people in years. Detectives, legal aides, advocates. But some names never lose their weight. One of them, Jack Hensley, an old detective I'd trusted on my toughest cases, still worked quietly helping survivors when the system failed. I sent him a message. No details, just enough for him to know it mattered. Then came the real discovery. In the early files archived online, buried under sealed county records, I found something. Tom's name connected to a complaint from over a decade ago. Different town, same pattern. A woman who withdrew her statement 2 weeks later. That was his trail, buried under silence and fear. The air felt sharper after that. My grief didn't vanish, but it changed shape. It became focus. I printed everything I could find, stacking pages into neat piles across the table. Lily's picture sat beside them, her smile from before all of this, bright and unguarded. I ran my finger across the frame and whispered a promise I intended to keep. This fight wouldn't be quiet. It wouldn't be polite, but it would be fair, and it would be thorough. As the sun rose higher, I capped my pen and looked over what I'd built in just a few hours. The beginnings of a case strong enough to expose a man who thought he was untouchable. I wasn't just her grandmother anymore. I was her defender. And Tom Miller was about to find out what happens when the truth has someone like me on its side. The hearing room was colder than I expected. The hum of the overhead lights filled the silence. That kind of sound you stop noticing only when you're too nervous to hear anything else. Tom sat across the table, perfectly groomed, pretending control. I'd seen that performance before. The calm voice, the faint smile, the illusion of reason. It used to work on everyone, but not today. I had spent days preparing this moment. Every file, every statement, every sealed complaint. I'd learned long ago that truth doesn't shout. It waits. It lets the lies speak first, then tears them apart with quiet precision. That's what I did, piece by piece, calmly, methodically. I presented the records of the earlier complaint, the one he thought was buried, then the screenshots of his messages, the inconsistencies in his own statement, the witness who finally stepped forward. Each truth landed like a slow, deliberate cut. Tom tried to keep his composure at first. He spoke with that same condescending confidence he'd always used on Claire, the same tone that made Lily doubt herself. He leaned forward, pretended to sound hurt, rational, even forgiving. But I could see it, the twitch in his jaw, the flash of panic behind his eyes. That was the real man, the one who couldn't handle losing control. There was a moment when he broke. It wasn't loud. It was smaller than that. A stumble in his words, a slip of tone, a single flash of fear when he realized the mask was gone. The truth was out. Everyone in the room saw it. Even he knew it. I didn't feel triumphant, just still. For years, his lies had built a cage around my family, one made of fear and appearances. And in that silence, I could feel it collapsing. I thought about Lily, sitting in the waiting room, her hands clenched together. I thought about Claire, finally admitting the years she'd lost. And I thought about all the women I couldn't help before. The ones who never got to see their truth believed. When the board adjourned and the officers escorted him out, the noise of their footsteps sounded final, not victory, just the sound of something ending. I walked outside into the afternoon light. The air was crisp, and the sun hit the courthouse steps in a way that made everything feel too bright, too honest. Lily was there, waiting for me. She didn't say anything, but when she looked up, I saw it. The faint, hesitant smile of someone who could finally breathe. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Not the fragile kind that depends on silence, but the kind that comes from truth finally standing on its own. The storm had passed. What remained was quiet, clean, and real. And as I took Lily's hand, I knew this wasn't an ending. It was the first day of freedom. The house feels different now, quieter, but not the same kind of quiet that used to hurt. This one feels gentle, like the world finally exhaled. Morning light slips through the curtains, touching the edges of the kitchen table where Lily sits, sketching again. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed that sound, the faint scratch of a pencil, the soft hum under her breath. It's been weeks since the hearing. Tom's charm couldn't save him this time. The truth came out piece by piece, and the weight of it sank him. Claire filed for divorce. Lily started therapy. Some days are hard. Some nights she still wakes up shaking. But there's laughter again. Cautious at first, then freer. Healing never arrives all at once. It comes in moments, in small, quiet proofs that life goes on. Sometimes, I stand by the window and think about how close we came to losing her. I think about the nights I stayed silent, convincing myself that keeping peace was the same as protecting it. I was wrong. Silence doesn't protect anyone. It protects the ones who do harm. I can't erase what happened. Not to Lily, not to the women I couldn't save back when I wore the badge of the law. But I've learned something that I should have known all along. Justice isn't just a verdict or a headline. It's the moment someone finally speaks, even if their voice shakes. There's a photo of my late husband on the mantel. Some mornings, I look at it and wonder what he'd think of all this. He always believed in fairness, in doing the right thing even when it's hard. Maybe that's what this was, our family's way of finding its backbone again. Now, when I see Lily smile, it's not the smile of a child anymore. It's the smile of someone who survived, who faced the truth and came out stronger. And when I look at her, I feel something like peace. Not because everything is fixed, but because we finally stopped pretending it was. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone listening, it's this: don't wait for the system to speak for you. Don't let fear turn into silence. The truth is heavy, but it's lighter than living with a lie. Have you ever faced something like this? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. The world feels quiet now. Not empty, just still. Like everything has settled into its rightful place. The storm has passed, and what's left behind isn't destruction, but space. Space to breathe, to rebuild, to feel safe again. I've learned something through all of this. Justice isn't always loud. It doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it's as simple as someone finally saying no more. Sometimes it's a young woman finding her voice again after years of being silenced. Sometimes it's a grandmother remembering what courage feels like and choosing to act when it would have been easier to stay quiet. When I look back, I don't feel pride. I feel gratitude for the chance to make things right, for the people who listened, and for the truth that refused to stay buried. I know there are others out there still fighting their own battles, wondering if anyone will believe them. I want them to know you are not alone. Silence doesn't keep you safe. Truth does. If this story means something to you, if it made you remember, or reflect, or feel less alone, share it. Leave a comment. Tell your story, even if it's hard. Because the more we speak, the fewer people stay trapped in the dark. I tell these stories not to reopen wounds, but to show how healing begins. One voice, one truth, one act of courage at a time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing. If you felt something here, like, comment, or share this video. Someone you know might need to hear it too. And if you've ever faced something like this, tell me in the comments. I read everyone.